Well, now to continue the story. As you may recall, Dov and Yehudah had a conversation, talking right on the sides of their mouths, trying to decide what they should be doing about this, when it was time to go down for lunch. And the doors opened, and the big, hairy, smelly, evil guy stood by the door as they marched down. But I have to tell you that they stepped back a little when Dov went through the door, and Dov gave them a look that let them know he was not afraid of them, because he wasn't. And they marched down the stairs to the dining room, and the dining room was pretty much the same. There were the same benches and the same tables, and when the food was brought out by the little lady, and a few other people required to help, of course. The people who were helping, by the way, were Chinese. They were very, very thin, very small people. I didn't mention them before because they really were apparently not very important. They just were. I think they may have been slaves as well. They didn't say a word. They just silently moved and dropped food from the pots and whatnot that they had, and the piece of bread and the food was, and the food was the same. It was the same crappy food that they had before. There was a glass of water this time, sort of a little, not even clear water, and a crust of bread, and well, there was a green pea. One green pea. That was the improvement that they got. So Dov was getting kind of steamed up, and Yehudah was saying to him, "Let's just wait and see. Maybe there's something more coming." But when it appeared that there was nothing else coming, Dov stood up and said, "What the hell is this?" And the little man, who now he changed his expression because he was a little afraid now of Dov. He said, "Well, this was the best we could do. We got some peas," and Dov said, "Well, it's not good enough for me." And just then, the wall suddenly changed. The wall in the dining room suddenly changed, and a door appeared. Something slid back. You couldn't have seen anything was different before, but somehow something slid back, and a door appeared, and out of the door came a man with a really scary face. And here he is. And he looked at the Dov, and he said, "Dov, who the hell do you think you are? I'm the big boss, and I will tell you when you have good food and when you don't." Ha! Well, Dov was not afraid. Dov looked this guy in the eye and said, "Well, let me tell you something. Right now, we seem to be helpless. That's true, but that doesn't mean we'll be helpless forever. I and my friend Yehudah will figure out a way, and we will escape from this terrible, ghastly place." "Oh yeah," said the big boss. "No, you won't. I'll keep you here until you're old, and then, you will just die here. You will never be free. Never! Never!" Well, this really, really meant that there was a problem. These people couldn't keep their word. One pea is not exactly keeping your word. And Dov and Yehudah really were thinking hard. Yehudah had his eyes on the spot where the door had been, because when the big boss went out through the door and the door closed, the wall slid over, and again there was absolutely nothing that you could see. It was seamless. There was no sign that the wall was any different than any other place. It was amazing that they could do that, but they could, and they did. But Yehudah, who had a very fine mind, fixed his eye, looked to the left and looked to the right, looked up and looked down, and he knew exactly, and I mean exactly, where that door had been. When they went back to the machines, Dov said to Yehudah, "Well, what do we do now? Got any ideas?" And Yehudah said, "Yes, I do. I know where that door was, and I know exactly where that door was, and we will get through it somehow." So they sat down at the machines, and they were chained up again. And when they tried to remove the piece of the machinery that they used as a weapon, this time, while they were having lunch, the piece had been fixed so it couldn't easily be pulled off. In fact, the whole machine seemed now to be somewhat changed, and must have been all those little Chinese people came up and worked on them so that they couldn't pull off any single piece. And they had to think some more about what they were going to do. Just then, there was a shaking and a thundering. And what could it be, they thought? What could it be? It was an earthquake. In China, they have earthquakes. They had one not too long ago. And the building started to shake, and the building started to quake, and everybody started looking around what's going to happen, and they were chained to the machines. What would they do? They were chained to the machines, and there was an earthquake, and the building was starting to shake. And in China, they don't always build the buildings very strong, and the buildings, sometimes they fall down. Well, what would happen if the building fell down and they were chained to the machines? They'd all be killed. They'd all be killed, and there was a shaking, and suddenly it stopped. Oh, they were really relieved. The building didn't fall, but there were cracks everywhere, in the ceiling, and in the walls, and in the floor. Cracks opened up. Well, Dov gave his machine a shove, and the machine came loose. And it fell over, and the chain, which was attached to the foot of the machine, was no longer attached to the machine. And Dov called out to everybody, "Push your machines! Push your machines!" And sure enough, the machines, fell over, and they all stood up, and they were loose. And not only that, the cracks in the walls had shown where the door to the outside was. Ho-ho! And Dov turned around and looked at the door, and everybody else in the room looked at the door, and the little man, who now isn't so brave, looked at the door, and suddenly the door opened up, and in came the big boss, and he stood by the door, and he said, Nobody will get out." And he ordered the big, hairy, ugly, smelly men to stand alongside him and guard the door. And they did. But Dov, swinging his foot with the chain on it, went up to the big, hairy guy and swung his foot and slammed the big, hairy guy in the face with his chain with the lock on it, and then swung his foot and hit the other big, hairy guy in the face with his chain with the big lock on it. And then he went up to the big boss and he swung his chain and hit the big boss in the head and knocked him out. And he went and he opened up the door, and all